Today's talk focuses on the fact that there's a big worry about whether or not China will steal all of Tesla's trade secrets and then give those to Chinese companies and wipe out Tesla. We also do our version of the preview on Tesla's earnings, which based on the record number of deliveries is actually very good, and what we can expect out of the earnings and going forward on the stock. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Please also note we want to thank our subscribers, and we also want to thank our Patreon supporters, both of whom we really appreciate it. Starting on Friday of this week, we'll start making available shows that are exclusively only for subscribers and Patreon supporters. So if you've not done both, please do so, because you'll get access to info that non-subscribers do not get. So one of the we've had a China theme going kind of for the last couple of weeks relative to the soon to open Chinese factory. Every day or two there's new news about amazing progress on the plant, and it was suggested that one of the top 3 people in China just visited the new Tesla facilities, and it's pretty much completed, and at this point workers are being trained by Tesla employees shipped in from the United States in preparation for starting some type of production in September. So all of this is good news on the plant. One of the themes that has been constantly raised by our viewers in our comment section is the fact that there's a big fear that China will simply use the opportunity of building a Tesla factory to simply steal all of Tesla's IP and then distribute that to state-funded auto companies and destroy Tesla in the process. So after seeing this numerous times, we thought it'd be a good idea to maybe do some research on this and talk with some of our advisors about how and if this might work, and therefore give us an opportunity to anticipate the issue. So the first component of this is absolutely China has a history of stealing intellectual property from other organizations to build their own facilities in key technologies. One example of this that I'm consistently amazed by, even though it's a 7 or 8 year old issue, and that is that there's this interesting phenomenon going on where one Chinese company that copied some intellectual property from Cisco Corporation, they even stole the code, and the errors in the code and the markings on those errors were the same inside of the code of the device that was being built by a Chinese company using software that had been developed by Cisco. So the concern is extremely valid. The next, by the way, I wanted to note to everybody, we can see when you say hello and appreciate your doing so, but continuity of the show demands that we keep moving and then respond to you at the end of the show. So feel free to prepare your questions and comments, and we'd be happy to respond then. I wanted to note that there's an interesting process that Elon Musk sort of carried through regarding intellectual property in Silicon Valley. So I met with a couple of venture capitalists maybe 2 years ago, and we actually asked an interesting question, which is, how focused should you be on making sure that your intellectual property protections were in place relative to the growth of your product? And I was really surprised by the response, which was, you want to focus on making sure you put all your resources in delivering a great product. And one of the logic streams is, one, get your product to market and move as fast as you can to use your resources to spread implementation of that product as a way to avoid, so once it's out there, it's a way to avoid intellectual property issues simply because it's out there. If you think about it now, instead of Hollywood deciding to distribute films in one part, let's say United States first, and then to other places, all those places are getting movies at the same time right now, because if you're copying it to allow people to see the movie early, if it's already in your city, there's no reason to have copies made because everyone has already seen it. So to some extent, we're seeing an example of how this process works in the case of Hollywood. So the argument was made basically that it's a good idea to protect intellectual property, but part of the problem is that there can be a situation happen where you simply can't protect it for a number of reasons. Another case example of this is what happened between Apple and Samsung with the iPhone. As all of you know, Apple was forced to limit distribution to AT&T only because AT&T would allow them to control how the phone would look, whereas all the other manufacturers like Verizon wanted to dictate how the iPhone should look, and the results speak for themselves. I wanted to note that the bottom line is that the Valley has assessed the fact that you can spend and work hard to protect your intellectual property, which is not a bad thing. The challenge, though, is that look at the example of the iPhone. The bottom line is that people will end up copying, and you can end up in very long, dragged out, expensive litigation that you may not be able to win, and you've consumed resources that might have gone into bettering the product and helping to get it to market faster. So the fact that Tesla chose to have open patents on 75% of what they were doing is basically a sign of the fact that there's a recognition of the fact that you want to do IP to some extent, but you want to anticipate the fact that if you're a small company and you've got to protect yourself in the IP space against very large competitors, it can be nearly impossible to do so. So strategically managing the process is a good idea. The next thing we wanted to review is the fact that in the case of Tesla, the decision was made to do open patents. And I believe that those open patents were particularly targeted towards China, because the Chinese went ahead and used those open patents as a way to help facilitate a number of companies opening up. So the bottom line of the situation is that Tesla elected to have open patents, and then they've chosen not to patent key components of the battery development as a way to protect themselves, because part of the process of the patent is you have to describe everything that you've done and why it's different. And so Tesla is able to retain a block of what they do that's key to their battery development that they didn't have to reveal to competitors, but they have to just make sure that they do a good job in this process. So I wanted to drag you guys through this conversation because the fact that, like right now, there is some intellectual property that's going to be lurking in the factory. In particular, you'll be seeing all the technology used by Gromon to build out the manufacturing lines, I think could be easily copied into other plants. But, more efficiently moving vehicles down a production line, yeah, it's an issue, and it's something that is intellectual property, but I don't feel like it's so different that one could not go to other major manufacturers around the world using similar technology as a way to get product out. So hats off to Tesla in anticipating issues. I'm also, one of the subtexts of this whole discussion of the China top secret plan is that usually China is used to going and sort of stealing IP secrets and implementing them. In this case, Tesla was wide open, allowed the Chinese to copy, and they've got a whole bunch of companies that are producing products that are substandard. This also brings us into a discussion about sort of how and why China is doing our thing. So I met with a German executive yesterday regarding range issues. And one of the things that pops up is, how do you use excess range? So an example of that is that during very hot or very cold times, i.e. below freezing, the battery needs to warm itself up to get optimal operating temperatures. So if you have a 300-mile range battery, you might use 50 miles or 70 miles of that to make sure your operating temperatures for the battery are okay. If you have a 200-mile range vehicle and 30% of the battery goes in thermal management process, you've now sliced the real usable range of vehicles dramatically. One of the illustrations that I've noticed about this is that anytime I run into friends who have Nissan Leafs, anytime the vehicle is home, it's usually plugged in, partially because it doesn't charge very fast, but also because it has such short range. Whereas I've been sort of doing a casual survey of hundreds of owners of Model 3s and Model S's, and I've noticed that probably 70 to 80% of those vehicles are not plugged in on a regular basis at their homes. And I think this illustrates the fact that with that extra range, one of the benefits is that you keep an eye on range, but you may be only charging up once or twice a week versus having to constantly charge in order to make sure that your short range battery does not run out. So it's easy to dismiss the fact that Tesla has 300 miles, 350 mile range vehicles, but it's interesting how living with the technology can be a lot more challenging if in fact you don't have the type of range that Tesla offers. So to sort of close out this portion of our show, in general, the theory was that China would simply steal off Tesla's intellectual property, and then Tesla would be out of business very soon thereafter, as China was able to bring this technology to the world. The other, final note on this to be aware of is the fact that Tesla knows that it has a 3 to 5 year advantage, and that all those R&D dollars being put to work by numerous entities around the world to compete will eventually result in products that are comparable. And so it's not only the Chinese that are closing the gap, but it's others. And one of the benefits of hooking up with a place like China where they can build factories quickly is that there can be an advantage to having large numbers of your vehicles all around the globe that are sitting in front of customers, and you develop the brand loyalty, all of the other elements of sort of control of the marketplace by being the biggest player in the space. And so I just think that it's a valid concern about IP theft, but the fact of the matter is that everyone is trying to catch up to Tesla and spending a lot of money to do so, and eventually that might happen. But if you're in the space with the biggest amount of vehicles, the biggest number of customer relationships, and those customers are happy with what you've done, I think that you end up with a command and control position that is way better than being a very small and slowly growing entity that has those same big competitors coming after you. We next wanted to do a preview on earnings that are due today, the 24th of July, 2019. There's this thing about Tesla's stock that, there's about a $260 price target. When the stock is below that number, there's a suggestion the market thinks that the company can go out of business. When the stock is above that number, it's a sign that the market says, hey, the company's not going out of business, they'll be doing fine. So now that we've closed the gap into the 260 range, the fear of running out of cash for the company has sort of disappeared. But the question mark is, are the numbers good? Are they better than expected? And also, what is the forecast that's going with those numbers? And so the overall assessment that we have is that the 30 or 40 point increase in the value of the stock price for Tesla is a signal that the marketplace has a lot of confidence in sort of where Tesla is currently and where they're going. The second component of this is, what does the future look like? And it's our assessment that the hookup with China will be huge because number one, China is still going to be offering customers $10,000 and Tesla gets to offer that to those customers as well. Number two, I'm just amazed by the suggestion that all these companies with 200, 250 mile range are on par with Tesla. And it's well known that particularly with Chinese companies, there's a business model phenomenon where they will actually try to get as many vehicles out there as possible, as quickly as possible. And then if the technology doesn't work, they don't mind getting into the lawsuit zones and leveraging. One example is there's a BYD customer, I believe, the city of Albuquerque, where they've had major problems with the buses that came from BYD. BYD's process has been to endure the lawsuit process and sort of hold that city hostage to the fact that they have a long-term contract, even though the performance of the vehicles is nowhere up to snuff. So we're kind of seeing this, fast to market idea from a lot of the EV companies. And we believe this is one of the reasons why China has chosen to go to Tesla to the detriment of domestic manufacturers, is that you have this phenomenon where a lot of companies have indicated they could easily compete with Tesla and potentially destroy them in the marketplace. But after experiencing the products delivered by these companies, they're not on par. And when you combine all the elements that Tesla does well, it's a way better solution for the Chinese to become a partner with Tesla rather than trying to help fund their destruction through domestic manufacturers. One of the final notes we wanted to dive into today is we've been sort of casually studying what's going on with major Chinese EV manufacturers. One of those entities is a company called NIO. And we can continue to be amazed at some of the data points that are spinning off of different companies, particularly affiliated with the Chinese. And one of them that was kind of shocking is that the Tesla factory that's being built in Shanghai by the Chinese government was actually supposed to be a NIO factory. But China chose to have NIO's electric vehicles built by a pre-existing Chinese manufacturer of ICE vehicles instead of building them a brand new factory. And therefore, Tesla ended up getting the factory instead of NIO and the support from the government to do so. So I just think this adds to the pile of, Tesla makes a difference and Tesla makes a huge difference by causing the Chinese to change or modify their process in order to, get better outcomes because they recognize the value proposition of what Tesla does well versus, trying to just be a huge competitor of theirs. The one sort of question mark that will hang over this partnership for a long time is the fact that, from the material we read initially, Tesla had agreed to not only build a factory, but also build a battery plant in China. And so Tesla has chosen instead to go ahead and look at completing the domestically produced car process by including batteries from China, from CATL, rather than BYD, and then continuing to produce batteries in the Reno Gigafactory 2 facility. So we're keeping our ears and eyes peeled to see if Tesla does in fact build a battery plant. And then I wanted to leave you with your last question that it'll be fun to get responses from, and that is the fact that there's this what is Tesla doing when it comes to producing their own battery? Yes, there's the partnership with Panasonic, but there seem to be some changes occurring here, and there's a discussion of a skunk works where Tesla will look to not only do the thermal management systems and the packs after the batteries are completed, but currently all of Tesla's batteries are produced by Panasonic, and Panasonic was chosen even within Tesla's own factory because they had the highest energy density. the Panasonic facilities at the gigafactory are the only place that you're not allowed to go when you're on a tour of Tesla's factory. So the fact that, Tesla is now looking at building its own cell, we find to be sort of interesting, strange, given how big the relationship is with Panasonic. But if any of you have any insight in terms of how this is working, we're kind of fascinated by how and why this looks. So please weigh in if you have any theories on this, but it just seems strange what's going on. There's a discussion of the whole mining Tesla issue, and I've kind of looked into it. There's an Indonesia plant that Tesla has signed to deal with, and there's been a discussion of what's going on in Latin America when it comes to a build out. So our assessment of the whole thing is that there's a big problem going on for all of the EV manufacturers, and that is, how can you get to scale production and be able to keep your cost inputs consistent? So if you're buying in the open market commodities that are increasing in value as the number of EV companies increases, raw materials keeps increasing. So one of the quote-unquote questions that hangs over the whole industry is, what if you establish a price for a car and then the inputs for the batteries, which represent half your cost, rise by 10, 20, 30% over the next, whatever the period might be? Do you keep having a variable cost of what your car is going to be coming out? And one way to deal with this is to simply reverse engineer to the mine to control this. So I wanted to know, it looks like we're having some streaming challenges here. We can continue discussion based on the comments and questions that you guys have relative to digging into this further. I think the whole mining question is an excellent area to look at in terms of what's going to happen with this, and we'll make a point of doing so. I wanted to remind you I'm about to do my 20 leg lifts per leg. Also encourage you not to go to bed within 2 hours of eating. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehitraot, choda hafez. And we thank you from all over the world in the United States for saying hello. JR, thanks for the question about the insurance prices. Excellent question, and a lot of people want to know exactly that. I think it's entirely possible because they're the manufacturer, and so that's a good one. The Maxwell discussion is fascinating to me because I keep hearing all these comments and questions about Maxwell and the potentialities of it. And I'm hopeful that it makes a huge difference for the company, but at this point, it still hasn't been seen. I think Maxwell is another area we need to dive into a little bit because we've gotten so many comments on it, et cetera. And I look forward to doing some more research and updating on what we learn in that space. Jerry Donovan, our friends from Corsica, our friends from around the world, thank you very much for joining us. Please take time to like and subscribe. We could use your help on Patreon. Have a great day. Bye for now, and stay cool in the summer months here in the U.S. Have a great day.